Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you all for being here. Crisis communications is a tough sport, and I do call it a team sport all the time. It takes tremendous work in advance, and we're going to talk a lot about that today. So, I'm going to talk about weathering the PR storm. As a longtime Red Crosser in emergencies, I saw a lot of storms, very literal storms. And we can make this comparison to a PR storm. We've got to be prepared in advance for them. We got to do some steps during and after. And so I wanted to talk about that today to hopefully really help us focus on the preparedness piece ahead of storms. So I want to talk about how we prepare now and keep preparing. I talk all the time with my team about a dust-free crisis communications plan. It should not gather any dust because it's a living, breathing document. We want to talk about what we do when the crisis actually hits. So we've been preparing. Now we need to hunker down and activate that plan. And then what do we do afterwards? So once the storm has passed and we need to pick up the debris, what do we need to do then? So for our discussion today, I'm going to use a case study. And this was one that actually happened on March 20th of this year in my school district. At 6:55 a.m. at Lamar High School in Arlington, Texas, a gunman walked onto our campus and opened fire. We have about 2,400 students that go to this high school. It was before the doors opened for school. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more, but I want to set that stage for you. This is the actual security camera footage from that morning, just seconds before the shooting occurred. You can see that the students were sitting out on the steps. Even though it was 6:55 in the morning, doors open at 7, classes start at 7:30. The campus was extremely busy. Buses were all on all sides of the building. It's 2,400 students. This is it's a big high school. And so we had parents dropping kids off, buses dropping kids off. Not all of our teachers had arrived on campus yet. Our 2 school resource officers had not arrived yet, but they were very, very nearby. And so for us in communications responsible for crisis, this is 6:55 in the morning. None of us were at work yet. So had we not had a plan, this would have been a lot more difficult. So I want to walk through how we got to this day and how we developed a crisis plan and prepared so that we would be ready when a day like this occurred. So we know that storms do happen, and we talked a little bit about some preparedness already, but I want to break down the most important thing any of us can do, especially if we work in crisis communications, is prepare, keep preparing, and never stop preparing, because it is the most important thing we can do. Develop that crisis communications plan. You want to practice like you play. You want to build a framework for what your daily events are, and you want to invest in the right tools and the right people that can help you during a crisis. So let me just walk through these and give you a little bit more information on each one. So when you're talking about building the crisis communications plan, which is extremely important, you want to define what is a crisis. I want to give you a little bit of background. When I came to the school district, we did not have a crisis communications plan at all. And so over the years, we've been building and refining, and we started with a simple exercise on what is a crisis. What do we define that as? And we defined it as a significant and unexpected event that creates uncertainty and can impact our ability to do our work. We also did a brainstorm, and we have a huge list. This is just a few of what we actually consider a crisis in our business. This is so important from the very beginning, is to understand what is a crisis and what is not a crisis. So we break this up in our crisis plan with listing what our actual crisis, and then what's an issue? We have a ton of issues. You guys have a ton of issues in education. It can be anything. There's a very long list. But usually an issue can be resolved fairly quickly and easily. It might have a negative connotation, but if we handle it at the time, then we can stop that from escalating into an actual crisis. So we list out a few issues. These happen all the time. We work with young kids. Students get left at the school because dad thought mom was picking the kid up, or they got on the wrong bus, and all of a sudden we don't know where the student is. Students, staff members, when they die, is an issue. It's not a crisis if it's not by means that we don't want to discuss. So we got very, very clear on what we consider a crisis and what we consider an issue. And then from there, we build our worst case scenarios. This is the reason crisis communicators do not sleep at night, because we have to look at everything from the perspective of the worst thing that could happen in our industry. As public school, we train to these scenarios that a group of shooters executes a coordinated attack on multiple schools. So I gave you our case with Lamar High School. That's one high school. We have 9. So if there was a coordinated attack on all of them at the same time, what would we do? If a fire erupted, trapping hundreds of teachers and students, this is the preparedness piece of our crisis communications plan. And I want to show you why this is so important. I know there's a ton of case scenarios from all over the United States, but I like to use our own because, we can pick on ourselves better than we can pick on others. So when we were putting together the crisis communications plan, the first thing we said is we must practice these worst case scenarios. We must practice, practice, practice. This was a real post of ours from November the 3rd, 2021. Sam Houston High School is another one of our schools, and it went on lockdown, but we didn't know why. So we put out a holding statement that you can probably read and find not very satisfying. Sam Houston is on lockdown. Arlington police are responding. Don't come to the campus right now. We'll update as soon as possible. It is not unusual to not have all the information. And you all know in crisis communications, the lack of information will cause other people to create their own. So here are some of the messages out of 103 that were posted on this one Facebook post. This is what we started to hear. My son told me there's a man with a gun. My daughter told me they said in the announcements, it's serious. She heard it's a shooting outside the school. It goes on from there to hopefully nothing happened inside, because now they're saying a lot of kids started running and screaming inside the school because someone was shooting. But I don't know. We'll find out later. This went on for quite a while. And eventually we posted again that said the lockdown was released and was triggered accidentally. Everyone is safe, following protocols to clear classrooms. We had 103 comments, all very similar to the ones that you just saw. And we did not respond to any of them. So I want you to hear this if you hear nothing else about a crisis. Human beings are going to do one of 3 things when they're scared. You're going to fight, you're going to flight, or you're going to freeze. And we froze. And it was a huge eye-opener that we needed to practice like we play on game day constantly. If you're a baseball fan, preferably a Texas Rangers fan, then we cannot be in the ALCS without having practiced our players ongoing. We have to do the same with crisis. We have to play so that when we get to the World Series, we're ready to go. So what we did was we took this particular Facebook post with 103 messages, many of them saying, my student said this, I heard that, I'm thinking it's this, and none of it was true. We took those scenarios, we put them up on the presentation screens, and all members of our crisis team, there's 5 of us total that work on crisis, We took every single one of those posts and each person wrote their responses. We evaluated as a group and we built a whole new set of training messages and response messages because we went through this terrible crisis. We were not transparent, we were not forthcoming, and we scared a whole bunch of people. So with all that said, we learned from it. And so we built from there an actual response framework so that we would never freeze in a crisis situation again. And I encourage this for anyone who's working in crisis communications. You're going to have your big plan. It's going to be multi-pages. I think ours is close to 80 pages. But from that, we extracted the emergencies that we respond to the most, and we built a framework. So what we have now and what we use now for a lockdown, I'll use that as an example. We have a checklist of every action step that we need to take during an emergency. So it tells us, first of all, we have to verify information from more than one source, because we hear a lot of things in public education. And 90% of the time, what you hear is not actually what's going on. So we require, before we announce information about an emergency, that we have it verified. And then these are just an example of walking through various steps until we get to the end of that emergency. This is all part of the framework that we built because we needed that to help us message clearly, concisely, genuinely, and transparently in the middle of a frightening situation for families. We built a new website, and to our knowledge, we are one of the only public school districts that is extremely transparent about safety in our school district. It is a very difficult topic to discuss with the public. We don't want to share information that would jeopardize our layered security plan. But when an event is happening at a school, we needed to create a way that everyone in the community knows what's going on. At the top of this page on your left, you'll see the security tracker button. That takes you to the safety page. So we created this page as a landing page for the public so that people can come on and learn, when we say lockdown, what does that mean? If we say a school's in shelter, what does that mean? What should you do as a parent? What should the public do? What can you expect? And we put it all out transparently. Part of being prepared too is making sure that you have the right tools in your toolbox. That is critical. For us, we had a program that we used to message all of our parents. We paid about $50,000 a year for it, and it was horrible. And so we were able to work with administration and get a board approval to purchase the right tools that would help us in emergencies do what we call COPE, create once and publish everywhere. The amount of time that saves in a true crisis is outstanding. So we were able to invest over $200,000 in the tool that we needed so that we could message correctly in a real emergency. And we know that 99% of the time when a school goes into lockdown, it's not an active shooter. But then that 1% of the time happens. And for us, that was this year. This is the security tracker from that morning. So we put the school on lockdown at 7:18 a.m. One of the things that we had to focus on immediately was the fact that there was a gap in between the shooting and this first message. The shooting occurred at 6:55 a.m. The superintendent notified me at 7:05. We're still at 7:18 a.m. So we immediately and in full transparency messaged all of our parents right before we put this notice onto the security tracker. The reason for the delay was we had kids everywhere outside of the school, and we didn't know where the shooter was. We didn't know who the shooter was. And so What we did during these minutes in between was sweep all of those kids from outside into the school and locked it down. So it took an extra 5 or 6 minutes of trying to get those buses offloaded, getting kids into safety, getting teachers in the building. But at the end of the day, not everyone was at school at that time. And so that's the reason for the delay. The transparency we did immediately so that parents would understand why we were slow in posting that. So now we're in it. We're in the soup completely. We know we have a school shooting. We know the police are looking for the shooter. And we know that we have about 700 people inside of the school. So the others, the 2,400, we got notices out, so they were not at school, but we had 700 kids inside of our building. And we have to move them to a reunification center. They don't just get to go home, and we know that. We've never run a reunification center. We've never had a school shooting on our campus. So for us, it was a huge test of all of that preparedness. Were we ready? Could we build a ton of materials and build it very quickly? So when we went to the reunification center, which is where our crisis team responded, we sat off in a corner, essentially. We set up a makeshift work location, and we built holding statements. We built news releases. We scheduled a press conference for 2:00 that afternoon with the Arlington police chief because we wanted to show that we were in this together. We wrote internal communication so that our staff knew what was going on. We set up our day 2 plan because we knew this wasn't going to be a one-day scenario. So while all of that is going on, the superintendent is pacing around us and he's asking, when do we do this? When do we do this? We had that framework. We had that checklist. And in the time when your mind is swirling, that preparedness piece came to play. So we pulled out the checklist and we developed on a timeline everything that we were going to do that day. But we were going to put him out in front of a lot of television cameras in Dallas, Fort Worth at 2 p.m. in a press conference. If that was the moment that we started thinking about how he would present himself, how he would represent our district in an emergency, or the kind of empathy that he would express, we would have been in big trouble. So we worked through our preparedness phase on what does empathy look like? Because I know you guys are probably much like me when you watch the news and, coming out of emergency response like I did, you see it constantly from an emergency manager or fire chief when they step up to the microphone at a news conference and they say, our hearts and prayers are with all the victims. Now let me give you the details. That's not what we wanted. We work with kids. And so we worked very hard ahead of time and then really did pivot on this day to develop the messaging. I can't play this video for you. I'm going to drop the link in the chat for you, but I've got the transcript and I want you to see what you think about the message our superintendent delivered. So this was the top of the evening news that night where they were announcing that the student that got shot on our campus, one had died. And so this is how they lead in the news. One student is dead, another injured, and a third student charged with capital murder after a shooting outside of Lamar High School in Arlington. The shooting happened just before 7 a.m., before most students and staff were even on the campus. Students who were already inside the school were put on lockdown. They were later moved to another location where their parents picked them up. Stephen Dial is live at Lamar High School tonight. So they go to the field reporter. He says school is canceled for Lamar High School students tomorrow. And when they return on Wednesday, there will be enhanced police presence by the Arlington PD. Now, the accused gunman is under the age of 17, so details about him and the motive remains unclear tonight. And then they roll to the superintendent's soundbite. He says, we prepare for incidents like this, but it's impossible to prepare for the emotion. Today, we're heartbroken. And that was his sound. And I share that with you because all of the work that we do preparing for emergencies in advance doesn't matter when you're standing at the site of a school shooting. All that matters is the moment that we're in. I think you did a great job of demonstrating that we do prepare, but we cannot prepare for the emotion. And I'm sure y'all can even hear it in my voice. This was not that long ago. And so we are all, as a district, still coping with this loss. 2 weeks ago, we went through the trial, and the student that did the shooting was sentenced as a juvenile to 40 years. We had to be prepared for that as much as we were prepared for the day of the shooting. So we worked with our high school, knowing that the trial was going to start, and we reminded them all about tips, mental health tips that they could take to help their students. So in a nutshell, kind of what we did on that day was what we would tell anyone to do. Tell it all, tell it fast, and tell the truth. We communicated what we knew, when we knew it, all throughout the whole entire day. We proactively arranged the news conference with the police department for the day of the event. And I will tell y'all in candor, the media was shocked that a school district came out and spoke that quickly during a crisis. And we strive to communicate with genuine empathy and express our grief. And we used our own platforms for follow-up. The next day, I sat down with the superintendent, with the principal of the high school, and with our head of security. And we did a detailed timeline from 6:55 a.m. that morning until the end of the day before. We were able to push that out to our parents so they could see and hear and listen to what we did, what we know now, and what we're going to do next. That was all part of a plan in advance. So the last part that I want to talk about that's very important is you've done all of this planning. Now you're in it, but then there comes a time when you conclude that crisis response. For us, this was an emergency. So we would say you do not want to after action while you're still in the emergency. You want to conduct it as soon as possible, though, because you'll lose a lot of things. You'll forget a lot of things. But as soon as it's possible and you're done with the emergency, conduct an after action and document everything. What went right? What went wrong? What will we do better next time? And this is so important. And that is, don't forget to care for yourself, your staff, and other people around you. This is a tough business. There's nothing about emergency crisis relief that's easy. You know, a brand reputation crisis can weigh on a crisis communicator just the same as something as tragic as a shooting, because we invest so much of ourselves into these situations. What we deal with and what I've dealt with through most of my career does deal a great amount with the loss of human beings. And that takes a toll on everyone around you. So whether it's something that you deal with often or pray to God never have to, don't forget, as part of your after action, to have a plan to emotionally care for all of the people around you as well. So just to summarize everything and then just leave a couple of tips here, it's important to know that you can weather the storm. The preparedness piece, I can't stress enough. It's the most important thing that anyone in crisis is going to do. It's where you are going to build your framework. You are going to practice. You are going to ask yourself what an empathetic statement looks like if you have to go on the evening news or on CNN and deliver a statement about your brand or about your school. How does that happen? Training students today in crisis communications, I don't think is an easy business, and I have great respect for all of you who do that. The rules of the game haven't changed. The ways in which we execute have changed, but the preparedness piece will always be the most important part of crisis communications. I didn't talk a lot today about how to do the media interview, because you have to have a foundation to stand on before that piece can come into play. So prepare, and then prepare some more when it hits, and it will, because you're either in a storm now, you're about to be in one, or you just finished one and the next one is coming. That's going to happen. When you have a good plan, you're going to be able to hunker down and weather that storm. You do want to stay flexible, but have that framework and put it into motion. And then you're going to want to follow up. I can tell you in candor from our Sam Houston High School example that I gave you guys on our terrible response to a lockdown, we learned so much in our after action that allowed us to be better prepared for the day this school shooting happened. So as you're working with students and even within your own frameworks at your schools, know what that crisis plan is, know what you're supposed to do. And with students in particular, just let them know this is hard. It's hard. It's a hard business. It's extremely challenging emotionally, spiritually, physically at times, but it's well worth it because you are repping something that you truly do believe in, and you want that message to be strong. So use all of your empathy, your transparency, and your love for your product or your service to help you really be better at communicating. So I'm going to end with two things because this is the question I get the most. What happens if we mess something up? Y'all have to understand all of this, right, is moving at this, social media in particular is moving at the speed of rumors. If you mess something up, just fess up and fix it. Do it as fast as you can. Mess up, fess up, and fix it. And the other piece of advice I'll leave you with, and never forget it, is never Twitter when you're bitter, because it will bite you. So be really good to yourselves during a crisis, but be prepared, and be prepared some more. So I've got some handouts for y'all if they're helpful. I left you some excerpts from our crisis communications plan that are tips on interviews, how to pick a spokesperson, the qualities you want to look for. We left a chart on how to recognize the level of an emergency that you're in. Is this a level 1, low level, or is it, oh my gosh, the national news media is going to show up? So we give you a way to look through all of that. And then I've got the framework that you can use as examples or templates for your courses as well in crisis communications. So I'm going to stop right there. And let me stop sharing here.
Thank you, Anita.
My pleasure.
We really appreciate you sharing that very real, candid, and emotional experience. We could definitely hear the emotion in your voice. And what a great opportunity for us to learn from you, who's just gone through tremendous crises. So thank you for sharing that with us. We do have some questions. I'm going to get into those. How do you make sure there is a human element of empathy in your crisis communication plan?
That is so hard. Not going to lie to y'all. It looks easy when people do it well, but we see a lot of people don't do it well. So what we do is we practice and we test and we practice and we test. I will give you an example, and I don't mean this to be political. It's a good example, no matter how we feel in the political climate today. When 9/11 happened, on that day in the afternoon, Giuliani was walking down the streets of New York and the media were following along with him. And they asked him, Mayor, how many people are dead? And his response was, more than we can bear. That was not an impromptu response. He had taken a lot of crisis communications training, and he was trained to answer in that fashion. And so we do the same. We work in school, and so do all of you, People are by nature drawn to this profession because they have great empathy for other humans. And so we try to really write them down, test them out, record them on camera. Do they sound genuine? And then make sure your spokesperson is actually feeling what you want. When we wrote that message point of empathy for the superintendent, I had a pretty clear sense it would be the soundbite that got clipped. But we had 8 others. And so we just made sure that each statement, no matter what, demonstrated love for our students and care for the family. And we know we're in Texas. We all lived through Uvalde. We lost one student too many. So just work on it. Practice, practice, practice.
Great, thank you. What would you tell PR students about mental health and how their career might impact it?
I will say this with a ton of experience in crisis, and I know there's brand crisis. I've dealt with a lot of that, but I deal with a lot of human emergencies. And if that's the world that a student wants to go into, you have to take care of yourself. At the American Red Cross, one of the best tools that organization still uses are mental health counselors. So when you're on the emergency, you're at the mass casualty event, they're there with you, but you can't do your mental health when you're in the emergency. So they're there just to safeguard us during the crisis. We debrief with a mental health counselor before we go out of an emergency, and then they equip you with what to expect next. So if you're a student that's going to go into this field, be perfectly okay with admitting when you need help, because odds are you will. I've lived it personally. I'm pretty tough. I can handle a lot of things. Through my time at Red Cross, though, I did have to go for some extended professional help after 9/11. It was the first time I couldn't just come back and bounce back into my reality. Most people are not ever going to have that kind of lengthy experience. But I would just tell you, it will impact your mental health, but be 100% okay with yourself for getting any kind of help that you need, because it helps you be grounded, because you're going to have to respond again if you do crisis communications. It's seldom ever a one-time thing.
Thank you for that advice. What are 3 things you think are crucial for students to learn about crisis communication today in 2023?
Okay, I would say the first thing is it's so difficult. It's always been difficult, right, to respond to a crisis. So we talked about the number 1 thing is be prepared for the crisis. I would say number 2, be prepared for the speed at which it can escalate. I mean, I was like, I gotta retire. I can't keep up anymore. I'm gonna use AI to help me craft some responses going ahead. But be prepared for all of the rumors, all of the mis and disinformation that typically will come along with a crisis, and know how you're going to handle that. And the third thing I think is extremely important is always improve. This is not a game of 100% right or wrong. It is a very difficult game. You have to make game day decisions in the heat. Everything's on fire around you. You're hearing things you don't know what's true. So you want to make sure that you prepared that structure, where we went as deep as we must verify from 2 sources before we post anything. And then just be prepared for how fast it's going to move. You can stay on top of it, but you have to know what's going to happen, and then just be ready to improve afterwards.
Great. Do you have an activity that you would suggest that could be used in the classroom to teach students how to react in real time?
I think doing tabletop exercises is so fun. Not everyone agrees with me. I understand. It's okay. But instructors can go to sites like FEMA, Homeland Security, or even make up your own scenario in your classroom working with your safety people at your campus, they will have some kind of tabletop drill and have your students work their way through, give them the scenario, like we do with our worst case scenarios. We have one where we train on this with our team, where the superintendent was at a school delivering the Teacher of the Month awards to that school. And we had a widespread supercell tornado outbreak. Many of our schools got hit. He was in one of them. We're hearing all these rumors of teachers and staff and children being dead. What do we do? So issue that out and have them work through. You can provide a framework, but have them work through, what would I do if this was me? Then there are tons of case studies, in crisis communications. The Tylenol scare of the 70s or 80s, that never goes away. The pandemic, oh my gosh. There are a million lessons on what we would do there, but practice like you play. So build the scenarios. And I think that is so fun with students who have to figure things out together.
Great. Last question. Are there certain media platforms that you stay away from with crisis communication? And do you treat those platforms differently in terms of how you might pass on content?
Yes. And thank you so much for asking that. In a crisis situation, if we've done our preparedness job right, we have communicated to our key stakeholders, our students, our parents, our staff, exactly where we communicate emergencies at. On that safety page that I mentioned, we actually created a chart. So it's got a Twitter icon, a Facebook icon, the website, on down the line, and we check the box on where we're going to communicate with you. During an emergency, we keep it pretty narrow. The security tracker is open to everyone, and that's why we created it, because the news media can go there, reducing the number of news media calls that we actually have to field when we're in the heat of the battle. Facebook, we use the impacted schools Facebook page, not the district Facebook page, because we've got 40,000 followers there and everyone will have an opinion. We want you to go to the location and get the crisis information where it's occurring. And so we put that chart out and say, Instagram is not an emergency communications platform for us. We don't use it. We don't use Twitter, which is crazy because we have 103,000 Twitter followers, but we don't use it in an emergency. So we will email a parent, a staff member and students. We will text them the same exact message, post it on the security tracker, drop it in our app, and update the Facebook page. Because you have all these platforms does not mean you have to use them all, because at the end of the day, maybe you're a party of one out there as a crisis communicator. What kind of time do you have? So pick your battles and pick your platforms.
That's great. Thank you so much, Anita, for sharing this information for your presentation. We really appreciate all the time and effort.
I appreciate it.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.